Welcome to the 2020 Wildland Refresher for Salem Fire Department. This year's a little bit different. You've already received an email with 3 documents. One of them is the memorandum from the state of Utah outlining the requirements for both new and the refresher for wildlands. In this video, we're going to be covering the refresher portion of it. So if you're a new wildland firefighter, please get with me. First thing you need to take a look at is there is the Wildland Firefighter Self-Assessment Health Questionnaire. This needs to be filled out by every firefighter and turned back in. If any of the questions are answered yes to, you will not qualify for this year's wildland firefighting. All of them have to be a no. And this is it to replace the PAC test, which will not be performed this year. So again, there is no PAC test for wildland firefighting. The third document that was in the email is going to be the requirements for the refresher for this year. It's a state refresher course which they have put together, and this video covers all the videos associated with that refresher course. So let's take a look at the document. It's the State of Utah RT 130 for 2020. This has the introduction, the responsibilities, the process, and then it goes into the different categories that we will be covering in this video for the refresher. So if you watch this video entirely through, you will have completed the entire refresher course for the wildland for receiving your red card for this year. Now there are several different categories. We have entrapment, aviation, 2 case studies, hazards, medical, fire environment, and it will end with an entrapment avoidance again. So these are the subjects that we're going to be covering for this year for the wildland refresher. And with that, you need to watch each and every single one. One thing to be aware of in the case studies, the second one for the Bald Mountain, it is a link that you need to refer to in the description of this video, and you have to read that. There is no video associated with that. To get to the links, there's also these QR codes to where it will take you to the individual videos, or you can continue watching this video here. So we're going to start off with and follow the sequence exactly for State of Utah RT 130 refresher course. And with that, we're going to count this as a refresher training for a wildland. And again, there is no PAC test. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started.
We got to this spot, and that's when fire crusted this ridge to the west of us. We could hear the roar, and then it seemed like that black smoke just burst into flames, and we had a wall of flames as high as we could see into the air, and just pretty much just filled your vision. It was coming fast enough that we didn't feel that we could outrun it, and that if we delayed any further, that we were at risk of not being able to get into our shelters. I yelled, "Get your shelters out," and they pulled their shelters out of their packs, and they had them in their hands, and they had taken them out of the plastic bags, and they were running with them in their hands. We knew that fire was going to be on us in seconds.
Crew Representative Dave Latour and 10 members of the Perryville State Corrections crew were entrapped on the Dude Fire near Payson, Arizona in June 1990. Dave and 4 others survived the entrapment. 6 of his co-workers perished in the fire. The fire shelter has been required equipment for wildland firefighters since the 1970s. Since that time, shelters have saved hundreds of lives and prevented hundreds of serious burn injuries. If entrapped in a wildfire, shelters are used to provide some protection from the fire's heat and smoke. A new generation of fire shelter now offers improved protection from both radiant and convective heat. This video will help you learn how to use this new shelter. What you see in the video may be familiar to you because much of the guidance for using the new shelter is unchanged. Stories related by firefighters who survived entrapments using the old shelter can still help firefighters learn how to use the new shelter. First, let's review the 2 most important types of heat a fire shelter might encounter. Radiant heat travels through space without heating the space itself. It turns into heat when it contacts a cooler surface. When you stand in the sun's radiant heat warms your skin. And when you stand near a campfire, you feel radiant heat from the flames. Convective heat requires air movement. Think of it as a blast of hot air. When flames or gases move past a surface, the hot air molecules transfer their heat to that surface. Hotter air and faster air movement lead to greater convective heating. The new fire shelter traps breathable air and reflects radiant heat. Its shape allows you to lie face down on the ground. This protects the underside of your body and allows you to breathe the cooler air next to the ground. The new shelter has 2 layers. The outer layer is aluminum foil laminated to woven silica. The aluminum reflects radiant heat and the silica slows heat's passage to the inside of the shelter. An inner layer of aluminum laminated to fiberglass prevents heat from re-radiating to the person inside the shelter. When these layers are sewn together, an air gap is created that offers further insulation. The outer foil reflects about 95% of the radiant heat that reaches it. Only 5% is absorbed into the shelter material, so the temperature of the material rises slowly. But convective heat is rapidly absorbed into the shelter material. If the temperature of the material reaches 500 degrees Fahrenheit, the glue that bonds the foil and fabric starts to break down. The layers can separate, allowing the foil to be torn by turbulent winds. Without the foil, the shelter loses most of its ability to reflect radiant heat. The silica material will slow heat transfer, but the shelter offers less protection than it would if the foil were still in place. The new shelter provides significantly better protection in convective heat, but flame contact reduces the protection it can provide.
The right side of my shelter delaminated and the foil flipped over onto the left side. There was still a tremendous amount of radiant heat coming off the surrounding area, and a wind blew the shelter half back onto the other side, back to where it belonged. And it was like somebody closing a door on the oven, you know, standing in front of the oven and just shutting the door on the oven. The radiant heat difference with just that little piece of foil made was absolutely amazing.
Deploying a fire shelter is a last resort. If entrapment seems likely, try first to escape. You should always know the location of your safety zones and escape routes.
Right below the safety zone, our safety zone, the hard black.
Remember, in a true safety zone, you do not need your shelter to protect you from heat and smoke. Carrying a fire shelter should never be considered an alternative to safe firefighting. If you are considering or are asked to take on a risky assignment because you have a fire shelter, it is your obligation to insist that the plans be changed. The new fire shelter is still a last resort and cannot guarantee your survival. Your highest priority in an entrapment is to protect your lungs and airways. Most firefighters who perish in fires die from heat-damaged airways, not external burns. One breath of hot gases can damage your lungs and lead to suffocation. If entrapment is imminent, you must quickly decide if you have time to escape. You will have to recognize when using your shelter is your only option. Watch for deployment areas as you move. If you can't reach a safety zone, don't pass through an effective deployment area only to get caught in a more hazardous area. If you are supervising others, give clear instructions and make sure they're understood. Time is critical during escape. As soon as you realize your escape may be compromised, drop your gear. Take your fire shelter with you, keep your tool, drop packs, chainsaws, anything that may slow you down. Firefighters have died carrying their gear while trying to escape a fire. You can move up to 30% faster without your gear. This can easily mean the difference between life and death. Drop fusees. They are the most dangerous items you carry. They ignite at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature common in escape conditions. Fusees burn initially at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This can quickly be fatal to a person inside a shelter. Shedding your pack can make it easier to deploy your shelter. Shelters can snag on field packs during deployment, especially in windy conditions. If you have a face and neck shroud, use it. But remember, it won't protect your airways from hot gases. The properties that make an effective deployment site have not changed. You must still find a site in which heat, especially flame contact, is minimized. Practice evaluating deployment sites so that you can recognize them quickly under stress. Identify effective sites whenever you are on the fire line so you know where they are before you need one. Let's rate some potential deployment sites. This is a chimney. Chimneys are some of the worst places to deploy a fire shelter because they funnel flames and hot gases, which can quickly damage your shelter. Saddles also funnel heat. They are also dangerous places to deploy. A wide stream bed like this can work, but narrow ones like this can funnel hot gases. A road crossing a slope can be effective because the flames rise upwards from the slope and tend to miss the road itself. Don't deploy in the middle of the road if there is a possibility that vehicles may be passing. Large rock slides can be effective places to deploy, but you must stay away from brush and trees and from fuels scattered in the rocks. It can be difficult to seal the edges of the shelter in large jumbled rocks. But rock slides sometimes offer the largest area free of fuels and may be the best option for deployment. Short, sparse grass like this can work because the flames would be of low intensity and would pass quickly. But taller grass like this can produce large flames that can quickly damage a shelter. Any concentration of fuel should be avoided, whether it's a pile of slash or a collection of firefighter packs or supplies. Thick timber or brush should be avoided since flame contact is likely in these areas. Objects such as large rocks, dozers, or even structures can act as barriers to heat. But if the objects themselves ignite, you may have to move. Testing shows that flames can funnel underneath vehicles that are in their path. Don't deploy under your vehicle. Don't deploy in an area where rocks or logs could roll on you, or snags could fall on you. A bench or a ridgetop like this are recommended because the flames and hot gases tend to rise above them. Fire intensity usually drops when fire reaches a ridge, but be alert for the possibility of the fire spotting and running up the lee side of the ridge. A large, natural or man-made opening can be a good deployment site, depending on its size and the behavior of the fire. Burned out areas work well too, as long as they are truly black. If an area can re-burn, it may not serve well as a deployment site. The area must be cool. Areas with light fuels can cool within minutes after burning, while areas of heavy fuels can remain hot for hours. Your fire shelter must be immediately accessible. Carry it in a fire shelter case positioned either vertically at your side or horizontally under your pack. The shelter may also be carried in the horizontal fire shelter pouch that is a feature of some field packs, or in a chest harness preferred by some operators of engines and heavy equipment. Never carry your fire shelter inside the main body of your field pack. If you are with your crew, your supervisor will tell you when and where to deploy your fire shelter. If you are not with a crew, you must rely on your own judgment. If you are entrapped, do not delay your deployment. Prepare for the worst. After removing your shelter from its case, throw your pack and any flammable objects, such as fusees or gasoline, far from the deployment area. Don't throw them near others who are deploying their shelters. Pull a red ring tab to tear the plastic off the shelter. Grasp the handles that extend from the folded shelter. The handles are marked right hand in red and left hand in black. Grasping the correct handles will speed your deployment. Shake out the shelter. Hold tight to avoid losing the shelter in high winds. Lie face down so your feet are toward the oncoming flames. The hottest part of the shelter will be the side closest to the advancing fire. Keep your head and airway away from these high temperatures. The hold-down straps on the new shelter are sewn into the floor panels. As soon as you are under your shelter, slip your hands through the straps up to your elbows. It is critical to be on the ground under the shelter before the fire arrives. When you are on the ground, push out the top and sides of the shelter so its volume is as large as possible. The air between you and the sides of the shelter is excellent insulation. Be sure that the shelter is fully unfolded and not bunched underneath you when you deploy. Don't roll up in the shelter, as this can lead to serious burns. Keep your nose and mouth on the ground. Temperatures just a few inches off the ground are dramatically higher than those at the surface. Wear gloves inside the shelter. Without them, you may burn your hands and be unable to hold down the shelter. Wear your hard hat to protect your head from burns, and if you use a face and neck shroud, pull it down into place. If you have a radio, keep it with you in the shelter so you can communicate during and after the entrapment. Always drink plenty of fluids whenever you're fighting fire. Your body can cope with high temperatures more effectively if you are well hydrated. Do not wet your clothing or bandana. Wet clothing conducts heat to the skin much faster than dry clothing, making burns more likely. It also increases humidity. Moist air causes more damage to airways than dry air at the same temperature. The best way to use your water is to drink it. If you have time, clear an area at least 4 by 8 feet down to mineral soil to limit flame contact with the shelter. Though the new shelter offers improved protection from direct flame, survival is more likely if flame contact is avoided. If you are being overtaken by extreme heat or flames, get flat on the ground. Death is almost certain if you get caught standing or kneeling in a flame front. Finish deploying your shelter from the ground. The new shelter is smaller than the old shelter. It is designed for one person. Sharing greatly increases your risk of injury. If you are forced to share, both people should have their heads away from the oncoming fire. If you are with a group, deploy your shelters close together. Adjacent shelters can provide added protection from radiant heat, and being close together improves communications between individuals.
They were cheering each other on and cheering each other up and saying, you know, again, we're Perryville, we're tough, we're going to make it, we're going to come through this. And that instantly changed when the front hit us. The winds were probably in excess of 70 miles per hour. The sense of power that you had around you, that energy release that we had around us, was just absolutely incredible.
Once you are in your shelter, you must focus on two things. You must commit to staying on the ground in the shelter no matter what, and you must protect your lungs and airways by keeping your mouth as close to the ground as possible. No matter how bad it gets inside the shelter, it will be much worse outside. If you panic and leave the shelter, one breath of hot gases can lead to suffocation and death.
I think for a period of probably 3 to 5 minutes, I was absolutely sure that was it, that I was going to die in this, that I would not survive this. There was no question in my mind. It was just, at that point, it was just a matter of when. And I remember thinking very, very clearly at that point that, you know, should I just ride this out and make this last maybe an hour or whatever time it takes for me to die from this? Or should I maybe just push this shelter off, stand up and take a deep breath and get this over with? At that point, I started to think about my family. I had my wife and I have 2 daughters. And I remember thinking, I need to do everything that I possibly can to go home and see them. And so that really is what kept me in the shelter.
No matter how frightened you feel, you must not panic. You must maintain control, keep your face against the ground, and stay under your shelter. To keep yourself calm, concentrate on your family or friends or on a religious symbol that is meaningful to you. Some people find that using a repetitive chant or phrase can help them stay in control. To help calm others, talk back and forth by shouting or by radio. But do not leave your shelter even if someone does not respond to your shouts.
It was extremely painful. The things that were going through my head were, I'm going to die, this is going to kill me, or that you're being burned to the point that you'd never be able to use those limbs again, when in fact they were third-degree burns, but I ended up being able to fully recover from that. I think it's very important for people to know what that experience might be for them, that they might believe that they're going to die, that they might believe that they're being burned to death, when in fact you'll probably survive well beyond that, but their greatest hope is staying inside that shelter and protecting themselves no matter what they hear, no matter what they see or feel, that they have to make just an absolute commitment to staying with that shelter if they want to go home.
Stay in your shelter until the flame front has passed and temperatures have cooled. Entrapment times have ranged from 10 to 90 minutes in length. Many entrapment survivors have spoken of being hit by more than one flame front, so use extreme caution. Firefighters have died when they came out of their shelters too soon. When you have left your shelter, make sure your supervisor knows that the deployment has occurred. Leave your shelter and other equipment in place if you can do so safely. It is important to learn all we can from each shelter deployment to improve safety for all firefighters.
Begin. 1.
Seconds are critical.
3.
Repeated hands-on training is vital to ensure speedy deployment and proper reactions in emergency situations. Each year, every firefighter should do repeated fire shelter drills. Drill until each step, from dropping your gear to deploying your shelter, can be done automatically. Firefighters who have been through entrapments have reported a calming effect of doing something they are trained to do. Having a familiar task can help firefighters avoid panic and can aid them in deploying their shelters effectively. Practice fire shelters, now made of green plastic, can be reused many times. Always train wearing gloves, a hard hat, and if you have one, a face and neck shroud. Practice deploying your shelter under each of the following 6 scenarios. Practice a standard deployment, first clearing a 4 by 8 foot site to mineral soil. Some firefighters have found that the best way to deploy the new shelter is to step in, sit down, and roll over. Practice looking at the shake handles and grasping them with the correct hands before shaking. Practice deploying your shelter from the ground by opening the shelter and pulling it over you. Practice dropping your gear and removing your shelter while escaping. Practice deploying the shelter in a strong wind. High winds are common in entrapments. Some people find it easier to deploy from the ground in a wind. Try a variety of techniques to find one that works best for you. To simulate deployment in a strong wind, practice with one or more strong fans, such as the positive ventilation fans used by structural fire departments. Learn to take advantage of the wind to help you open and deploy your shelter. But make sure your feet end up toward the oncoming flames. While lying in your shelter, picture yourself in an entrapment. Imagine the noise, heat, and fear. Some firefighters have suffered from claustrophobia while in shelters. Spend enough time under your shelter to find out if you are claustrophobic. If you are, gradually increase the time you spend inside the shelter to help you adapt.
I think under these situations, when things start to go downhill, you start to respond to them in the way that conditioning or training that we've had, and purely on that instinct that you've developed. Like tying your shoes. You don't even look down anymore, you just do it.
Never mix practice and real fire shelter components. This could lead to someone carrying a practice shelter onto the fire line by mistake. Never train in live fire. This is extremely dangerous and risks firefighters' lives. No one in this video was exposed to live fire while inside a fire shelter. The scenes you've seen here have all been simulations. Wear and tear on a fire shelter can reduce its ability to protect. Taking care of it is simple. Always keep the shelter in its white hard plastic liner. Avoid rough handling. Don't lean against objects when wearing the shelter or use the shelter as a pillow. Don't load heavy objects on top of the shelter, and keep the shelter away from sharp objects that can puncture it. Be sure to inspect your fire shelter when you receive it and every 2 weeks during the fire season. Inspect the vinyl bag to ensure that the quick opening strip is unbroken and the 2 pull rings are intact. Look through the vinyl bag for signs of abrasion. Do not open the vinyl bag. Remove the shelter from service if you see extensive abrasion or tears on the edges of the shelter, if aluminum particles have turned the clear vinyl bag dark gray, or if there is debris in the bottom of the bag. In closing, let's review the key points. The new fire shelter provides better protection against radiant and convective heat, but carrying a fire shelter is not an excuse to take greater risks on the fire line. As soon as you realize your escape may be compromised, drop your gear. Take your fire shelter and your tool, but drop all dangerous flammable objects and drop any items that may slow your escape. Always deploy the fire shelter so that flame contact is minimized. Once you commit to your fire shelter, stay inside. Conditions outside the shelter will be far worse than those inside. And train with your new fire shelter as if your life depends on it. As a firefighter, your highest priority is to stay out of situations that can lead to entrapment. The new fire shelter offers improved protection against radiant heat and flames, but like its predecessor, it is still a last resort.
You never know if that helicopter is not going to be able to make it to that helispot, if your engine's going to get a flat tire, if the trail you're walking out is not the right trail and you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Communication's not there and somebody's firing off the wrong piece of line and you're in the wrong place. You can be the best firefighter in the world and maybe something will happen to where you have to use the shelter, and that's why I'm here to talk about it, hoping that if it comes down to that, then people know, how to survive with it.
For the 8th time in 9 seasons, communications has been the leading contributing factor in SafeNet submissions. The majority of submissions deal with communications equipment, the remainder being personal communications issues. Think about the unique communication challenges we face. Let's start with personalities, all different. On your crew, you get to know people like family, while on an incident, you may work with total strangers. Each person presents a different communication challenge, and that's just the beginning. Let's add some stress, confusion, and possibly a malfunctioning radio system. Most of the time we can work through the problem, but when we can't, the outcome can be very bad. With aviation representing a huge component on most incidents, establishing effective communications is more critical than ever. Consider the challenge. You've probably never met the person you're talking to. They have a totally different view of the incident, and in some cases have never fought fire on the ground. However, they still need an incident briefing and an appropriate tactical assignment.
As an air attack, primarily I manage incident airspace and incident air traffic, and also I work with the firefighters on the ground in an effort to meet their objectives. An air attack has several capabilities and limitations as well. An air attack can size up a fire. An air attack can find routes into the incident for folks on the ground. An air attack can fly out way in front of the incident and look for values at risk, help the incident commander develop a tactical plan, establish priorities. There are some limitations with that. The main one is fuel and then weather. An air attack typically can stay over fire for about 3 hours. Also with weather, if there are low clouds or thunderstorms in the area, then an air attack's going to have to go in and sit down and wait for better weather. Air attack is not a lookout. I would never ask air attack to be a lookout. They cannot stay over one particular location for an uncertain amount of time. However, an air attack can patrol your section of line, look for spot fires, see if fire is hooking engines, and gather any intelligence you need, but never should air attack be considered a lookout. Air attack can serve as a relay for ground resources in a couple of different ways. If the incident commander can't talk to dispatch on a repeater frequency, they can't hit the repeater if they're down in a hole or something. Air attack can relay any information back to dispatch that way. Also, if crews can't talk to one another on tactical because of terrain or something is obscuring that radio transmission, then we can just relay information between crews, and we're happy to do that. As an initial attack IC, when you get out there on your incident and you have 1, 2 aircraft out there, you're fine working with them. But if you get more than 3 aircraft or 3 or more aircraft on that incident, order an air attack or a lead plane if you're just working with air tankers. That aircraft can do so much more for you than just directing the incident airspace and reducing your span of control in that regard. When air tankers are on final approach, whether it be a seat or a heavy air tanker, they're flying low, a seat 60 feet and a heavy air tanker about 150 feet, and they're flying pretty slow. Seats are going to drop at right about 100 miles an hour, and then a heavy air tanker at about 120. And they're also very heavy. Retardant weighs about 9.2 pounds per gallon, so a 3,000 gallon tanker is 27,000 pounds. So when those airplanes are coming in on final, it's very important that the line is clear, because when that retardant comes out of the airplane, it's a mass of 27,000 pounds going 100 miles an hour. When an air attack's on scene, they can see quite a ways away on any thunderstorms that are building on it or any weather that may be moving in. Many times I've spotted lightning in the distance, let ground crews know thunderstorms are coming in. We've either disengaged or changed our tactics. The prerequisite to be an air tactical group supervisor is either division supervisor or incident commander type 3. Essentially, there are three main fixed-wing aerial supervisions. The first one is the air tactical group supervisor, who orbits the fire at about 2,500 feet above ground level and manages the incident airspace and coordinates priorities with the folks on the ground. And it's important to know that when they're on their way to an incident, they may be referred to as Air Attack 5-5 or Air Attack 3-1, which refers to the tail number of the aircraft. Once that air attack gets on an incident, they become the air attack for the incident and will assume a name such as Snake Falls Air Attack or Fall Creek Air Attack, something of that nature. If there are enough tankers or helicopters on the fire, you're going to have a lead plane, which works for the air attack, and the purpose of the lead plane is to direct air tanker operations. Lead planes are a little different. They're always known as Lead 4-9, for example. On the other side of that is the helicopter coordinator, or HELCO. And the lead and the HELCO can be considered airborne task force leaders. HELCO does helicopters, the lead works with the air tankers. The third type of fixed-wing aerial supervision is the Aerial Supervision Module, or ASM. Aerial supervision modules are always preceded with a B, a Bravo, and then the lead plane number. So for example, Bravo 7, you know you're getting an ASM, and then the lead plane pilot is lead 07. And what the ASM is a combination of the lead plane and the air attack. And those two individuals are in the same aircraft performing a dual role mission. They do all of the air attack stuff with the folks on the ground, and they also coordinate air tanker operations. It's a very efficient way to go about our business. Typically, an air attack aircraft will have 2 to 3 AM radios and 2 to 3 FM radios. In a 3 AM radio configuration, we're talking to air traffic control if we're in the proximity of airports. We're talking to helicopters on a designated rotor wing Victor frequency, and we're also talking to air tankers on a designated fixed wing frequency. On the FM side, if we've got 3 FMs, we're talking to dispatch on 1 FM. We're talking to folks on the ground on a designated air-to-ground frequency. And then on our 3rd FM, we'd be monitoring command on large fires or perhaps a tactical frequency on smaller fires. It's pretty hard to keep track of who's talking to us because of all the radios that are going off. With up to 6 radios, it can be a lot of noise in your headset. So once we're on an incident, I'll just have my air-to-ground volume tweaked up a little bit so I can always talk to the folks on air-to-ground. But it's important that they realize that if I'm talking to an air tanker or dispatch on another frequency, then I may not hear them calling. So the best thing to do is try again. If you still don't get us, wait for a few minutes and call us back, realizing that we have all those radios up there on the airplane and we're talking to somebody else and we're busy.
Hey, air attack, we are
I think he's got that secured up there. If you can bring engine 3 and 4 down to where the 2
I'd like you to start here and carry it into the existing retard line. Roger that.
Initial contact when we arrive on scene is typically somewhat chaotic. There's a lot going on. It's an emerging incident. The ground crews are busy trying to figure out how to anchor into the fire and get established, figure out priorities. A lot of traffic between dispatch, so it's pretty hard to get a word in edgewise on the radio. In my opinion, the chaos is something to expect and you can learn to live with, but you can also manage it. You know it's coming. If you know aerial resources are en route to your incident, be prepared for them. Have somebody up on that air-to-ground frequency and have a plan for those guys once they get there, so we're not wasting a lot of time orbiting the incident when we could be working for you. One of the biggest pitfalls is conflicting priorities on large fires. You may have 3 or 4 critical divisions and everybody wants helicopters, everybody wants air tankers, but we can only do so much. We have limited capability in that regard. So it's important for the divisions to get with ops and figure out which is truly the top priority so we can focus on that. If you have multiple air resources and no air attack on your incident because that resource has been diverted to another start, think about setting some of them down. It's not safe to have all those aircraft in that airspace. If you have 2 helicopters, 2 seats, and a heavy air tanker coming in, make sure you've got aerial supervision on order, whether it be a lead, air attack, or an ASM. When you know those aircraft are inbound, it's time to implement your plan for talking to them, whether it be designating someone to be the air contact or something like that. Just be ready to talk to them and have that frequency being monitored. Invariably, you get up on scene on a fire and all hell is breaking loose. There's chaos everywhere, dispatch is cranking. You're busy trying to do a size up and whatnot. And in the meantime, you've got tankers, helicopters, and aerial supervision orbiting your fire with nobody to talk to and nothing to do. When aerial supervision arrives on scene, we expect a briefing from the ground contact, whether it be an IC or division supervisor. And that the briefing should consist of what the intent is, what your objectives are for the incident, what your priorities are for the aircraft. Keep in mind it's important to have your main plan and a backup plan, because if our primary target gets obscured with smoke, then we still have something we can go do. When firefighters are communicating directly with helicopters and they're trying to get them directed into a drop or into a landing spot, the first thing they need to do is establish visual contact with the helicopter. Once they do that, give them a quick mirror flash and say, I'm at your 12 o'clock at 3 miles. If they get the flash, the helicopter pilot will come back, I've got your flash, I'm on my way in. And then from there, if you're directing a bucket drop, have a panel on the ground or be waving a fusee. It's some sort of visual reference on the ground that helicopter can verify as the target. Once the helicopter gets the target, get out of the way, have them make the drop, and then you can give them feedback from there on the next drop. The best way to describe a target to aerial supervision is to use the fire anatomy. For example, heel, head, left flank, left shoulder, right shoulder. Try to avoid using compass directions. Since we're flying either a left-hand or a right-hand pattern, our compass is constantly rotating. So the best way is to say anchor in at the heel and work up the left flank, as opposed to saying work up from the southeast corner to the northwest corner. When air tankers arrive on scene, they may or may not have a lead plane or any aerial supervision with them, so they will be talking directly to you if they're initial attack rated. Before an air tanker is going to come in and drop for you, they're going to need to know the location, they're going to need to know hazards, the coverage level of retardant you want them to use, and whether or not the line is going to be clear for them to drop. If the target description to the air tanker is unclear, one thing you can do is just have them fly a dry run over the target to make sure that you're both on the same page. The pattern that tankers typically fly over fires is just like an airport traffic pattern. It would be a left-hand pattern comprised of an upwind, crosswind, downwind, base, and final leg. As a ground resource, you can do so many things for us because you're on the ground. You can get temperature, relative humidity, and wind information to the aerial supervision or to the tankers and helicopters working on your fire. Wind is very important for air tankers and helicopters for two reasons. One is the effectiveness of the bucket drops or the retardant. Once wind gets up to 20 miles an hour or so, retardant is not going to be very effective. It's all going to drift away. The other thing is the safety of the aircraft. In that kind of wind, there's going to be turbulence. If we're working in canyons and over ridges, there's going to be mountain waves and rotors, and it's going to be a detrimental effect to the aircraft to have them out there working in windy conditions. Also, as a ground resource, it's important to relay any information as to other hazards. Anything that would do damage potentially to an aircraft, whether it be snags that are really hard to see, a ridge that is obscured in smoke, maybe a cell phone tower that's really hard to see from the air. Any towers, power lines, anything that would hurt an aircraft at all, don't hesitate to give us a call and let us know that they're there.
As you can tell from your personal experience and from viewing this module, aviation communication can be complex and has a lot of variables. This next exercise is intended to give you more experience communicating with aviation resources and can be applied to all situations you deal with while working on an incident.
The Southwest Idaho Desert is a landscape steeped in history. South of the town of Kuna, a memorial stands testament to a tragic day in the history of wildland fire. On July 28, 1995, during mop-up on a 120-acre brush fire, something went terribly wrong. 2 firefighters lost their lives.
This wasn't any extraordinary fire at the time. It had good fire length. If you're on the end of the hose, it's something that a lot of people cherish. They like to fight fire. As you will learn later, when the fire breaks out and the wind hits, it becomes extraordinary. That day it's a tough day for all of us. It's not a good memory, and I appreciate the fact that the Bureau and the rural fire departments are trying to say what are our lessons learned. That's the best, so the individuals do not pass in vain.
July 28th, afternoon. A dry cold front sweeps into southwest Idaho, bringing gusty winds and dry thunderstorms. Lightning from the storms sparks dozens of wildfires. At 18:29 hours, Danskin Lookout reports a fire 16 miles southwest of Boise. The BLM Boise District Dispatch responds, sending the Wild West unit, consisting of local Type 4 and Type 6 engines, a supervisor to serve as the incident commander, and an attached Type 4 severity engine. More resources are soon dispatched. Boise BLM Unit sees 2 Type 4 engines and a Suburban driven by the unit leader, a Type 4 severity engine, a water tender, and a dozer. Upon arrival at 1900, the IC makes his initial size-up of the point fire, 60 acres in size, burning in mature sagebrush and heavy grass, flame lengths of 3 to 5 feet on the flanks, winds from the west at 4 to 6 miles per hour. At 19:05 hours, the incident commander receives a radio call from the fire chief of the Kuna Rural Fire District asking if he needs any assistance. The IC asks for a brush truck and water tender. The Kuna fire chief contacts the county dispatch center and requests 2 engines and a water tender to respond to the brush fire south of town. The IC's initial strategy: keep the fire from crossing Swan Falls Road. He assigns engine 29, the Type 6, to hold the road, burning out where necessary. The other engines, 6-7 and 425, follow the IC to a point near the origin at the southwest corner of the fire. He instructs them to anchor, split up, and directly attack the flanks. The dozer arrives to secure the heel and construct line to the east to prevent fire spread into the National Conservation Area to the south. A helicopter departs the Boise airport at 18:57 en route to the fire, where it picks up the IC for a short reconnaissance flight. During the flight, BLM Unit C arrives on scene on Swan Falls Road. Engines 6-1 and 8-3 are assigned to work the north flank. Engine 09 will work the south flank. The Unit C crew leader stays back to assist 2-9 in holding Swan Falls Road.
We had to make sure we secure both anchor points on the north and south flanks, which we did. I participated in that. Meanwhile, my crew is going to start down the north flank. At that point in time, the Kuna engines come into play.
At approximately 19:30 hours, Kuna engines 620 and 622 and their water tender arrive on scene. The Kuna Rural Fire District captain instructs the engines to stay together and work behind the BLM engines on the north flank. He arrives on scene riding an engine 620 and is dropped off on the road with the water tender to act as Kuna command, as directed by the fire chief. The BLM engines begin flanking the north line westward from Swan Falls Road. They are held up by a small flare-up as they cross a fence line. Kuna 620 and 622 drive around them in tandem and knock down the flames using nozzles on their front bumpers. At 20:10 hours, the IC updates his dispatch center. The engines on both flanks have met, and fire spread has been stopped at approximately 120 acres. At 20:22 hours, the BLM dispatch center reports a red flag warning for dry lightning and locally gusty winds. At the incident, wind gusts of up to 50 miles per hour are predicted from a thunderstorm moving northward at 30 miles per hour. The IC alerts the engines along the northern perimeter to anticipate gusty winds. Kuna 620 and 622 proceed with mop-up westward along the northern flank, then south around the west end, finally turning east. They pass by the dozer and BLM engines, ending up at a fence on the southeast corner of the fire. There, engine 622 meets with engine 29. They receive direction over 29's radio to turn around and work back around the fire perimeter, soaking it with water. Working in tandem, they head west along the southern line. They continue to the southwest corner, then hook north, where 622 runs out of water. 620 then takes the lead. At this point, CUNA 622 radios the IC for direction. The IC instructs 622 to refill with water and stand by due to the predicted high winds. 622 pulls off the line and drives east through the burned area toward Swan Falls Road. Just prior to reaching the road, 622 receives a call from 620 on the agency tactical channel, advising that their vehicle is overheating. 622 instructs them to remove the screen from the radiator, and 620 acknowledges. Engine 622 continues out to Swan Falls Road and turns south to meet with their water tender on the southeast corner of the fire to refill. Soon after 622 leaves the line, CUNA 620 passes engines 61 and 67 on the west end of the fire. No communication is exchanged.
We do not know if engine 620 actually heard the red flag warning. They still took the course of action that they did. They may have known and decided this is what we want to do, and they may have had every reason in the world to do that.
For unknown reasons, 620 then turns north on a 2-track road at an intersection near the fire's northern perimeter. They travel northward along the road, then turn off the 2-track and drive northeast cross-country through heavy sagebrush. At that point, the vehicle stalls. 620 sits immobile 713 feet west of Swan Falls Road and 1,750 feet north of the fire perimeter. At 2046, the fire, fanned by strong southerly winds from a thunderstorm, escapes the northern perimeter at multiple locations. The BLM Unit C crew leader and a fire investigator drive north on Swan Falls Road to observe the fire behavior and scout new control lines. Here, they witness the CUNA engine in the path of the oncoming flame front.
I drive down the road to this spot over here that's marked by the memorial there, and to my horror, I see this engine out there. Okay, it was stopped.
They repeatedly attempt to radio 620 and CUNA Command on the Incident Tactical Channel, but receive no response. At the time, they do not know if the engine is occupied.
I'm calling, looking for more information, for more input. Are they there? And if they are there, is there going to be time for them to jump in my carryall? We're going to drive through the fire, because I don't think I can drive away from the fire. I was desperately looking for movement. Movement around the engine, movement of individuals maybe running for the fence, running somewhere.
At 2049 hours, Engine 620 calls CUNA Command on the county radio frequency. We're on the north line. We've got fire coming hard. This thing has died. 1 minute later, 620 calls the commander again on the same channel. It's not going to let us out of here. The CUNA fire chief then calls. What kind of problem do you have? Engine 620 replies, we're surrounded by fire. The chief asks him to repeat. The truck has been overtaken by fire. This is the last radio transmission heard from Engine 620. The fire continues to move rapidly and burn intensely. Flame lengths exceed 20 feet. Rate of spread is an estimated 560 feet per minute. It takes only 4 minutes for the fire to overrun the truck.
We try to organize a strategy as what, if anything, can we do to go out there and see what happened. Are those firefighters in that vehicle or not?
Rescue efforts are hindered by fire duration and intensity. Blowing smoke and residual heat render the first few attempts to reach the engine impossible.
And so a couple members of the salmon crew attempt to get out there. It's too hot. The CUNA commanders are coming up the road because they know there's an incident, and they're going to assess that situation to see what they can do to provide a rescue.
At 21:21 hours, Engine 620 is still on fire. CUNA 622 is the first to reach the vehicle and extinguishes the flames to gain access. 622 then notifies CUNA Command of 2 fatalities. The fire continues to burn. When contained approximately 5 hours later, the point fire has consumed over 10,000 acres.
So that was the event at that point in time. And it was a tough time.
The deaths of Bill Buttram and Josh Oliver were not the result of a single circumstance, but the consequence of a chain of unfortunate events. Individually, each factor was survivable, but when their departure from the safety zone and the mechanical failure of engine 620 compounded with communication failures and 50-mile-per-hour outflow winds, the combination proved fatal. The Point Fire Accident Investigation set forth numerous recommendations to strengthen the collaborative efforts of agencies and cooperators in fighting wildfires. The effects of these recommendations are apparent today.
I believe that the point fire and the unfortunate results thereof was probably the catalyst that brought together our community to say, there's a better way. We do not have to fight fires this way, and collaboration and cooperation is how we now fight fires.
So it was prescribed fire, and that day we weren't lighting or anything. It was more just a secure what we already had. I believe they were concerned about some winds or something like that. So we just went out there and we were just building some check lines here and there on some of the stuff we lit. Where I was, it was a little slop over that we had on our lines, and it was kind of between two large rocks. And we dug line between these two rocks where we had there, and me and my saw partner and one other guy were all left there to kind of just to hold that little area and just make sure it's okay. There was I believe 3 pretty small snags in there that had some heat in them that I was going to secure up. It's a rocky area, like there's a lot of like rock bluffs and stuff like that, kind of hilly and rocky with just some of those trees mixed in between. It was kind of a hot area, and it was kind of just a lot of ash pits and stuff like that were kind of just keeping it hot. So I didn't go in there immediately. We kind of just hung out there for a little while, just to kind of let it cool down before I ever went in there to do anything with the snags. I cut the first snag, and I fell it up on one of the rocks that we were using as a natural barrier, and I didn't really like it, just kind of like that. It was kind of a holding concern because the fire could just kind of burn up the tree, and I just kind of wanted to secure it up there. So I was up on the rock, kind of just bucking pieces off the tree. Chainsaw, I was running it. It was running fine, and nothing noticeable about the chainsaw. And then I got done doing what I was doing. I was satisfied with how I secured up the tree, and I just shut my saw off like normal. I walked back over to where my saw partner was, and he was away from the black up in a comfortable, cool spot. And I went and I sat next to him, and I set my chainsaw down next to me. And we were just up there talking. We were talking about the next tree I was going to cut, and just kind of looking at stuff and just hanging out for a little while. It was probably a good 15 to 20 minutes. I'm not sure, but it was a good little chunk of time that we were just hanging out there. So after we hung out there, like I said, for 15 to 20 minutes, I decided I was ready to cut the next tree. So I grabbed my chainsaw and I walked into the black, and I walked over to a tree, and there's a rock I was standing on. I was going to cut it from, and there's some ash pits around me, and there happened to be like a little piece of open flame just like right by kind of where I was standing, but. So I went in there, and I went to start my chainsaw, and I gave it a couple pulls, and it turned over, but it just kind of, gargled it for a second and then died, kind of like when you run out of gas. The first thing in my chainsaw troubleshooting mind, was like, hey, maybe I was over there cutting that a little longer than I thought I was, and maybe I used more gas than I thought I was. Maybe I'm actually out of gas. And my first reaction to check that was just to kind of flip the saw over on the side on my hip and pop the cap just to look inside to see how much was in there. And at that point is where it geysered on me, and it was two distinct geyser spurts that came out of my gas tank at that point. And I couldn't exactly tell you how high it got, but I mean it had to be over a foot above the tank. It was the biggest one I've seen. I don't know why. I couldn't explain to you why it was so volatile that time, but of all the ones I've seen, yeah, that one was definitely the biggest one. I didn't catch on fire immediately. Like I had enough time to look at it and kind of have a oh crap moment, if you will, with what happened, because I knew that. I mean, I'd heard the stories, and we've done training on it, So I knew I wasn't in a good place at that time, and my saw partner who was watching, he actually yelled at me to watch out, because he saw just a little piece of like open flame right there that was kind of near me. At that point, I ignited, if you will. Kind of sounds weird to say that, but I caught fire, and at first, I didn't have a dramatic reaction to that. I dropped the chainsaw first off, but kind of just patted at my shoulder, like trying to put it out, and it just got bigger. I want to say it's like my arm, kind of this whole right side of my body is kind of went up in flame, and I mean it's kind of hard to tell. It's like kind of burning off the back of me. At that point, I kind of realized I was in more of a trouble, and I didn't really have a good spot to go because of all the hot ash pits around me, and I was aware of that. I was like, man, I just don't have a good spot. So I made a beeline for the hand line. We dug stuntman style with some flames coming off me, and once I hit the hand line, I dropped to the ground and just rolled over, and my saw partner, good dude that he is, jumped on top of me and threw some dirt on me and put me out. Even after I got myself out, I was pretty calm about the whole situation. I got the radio from my SAW partner, and I just made the notifications to my supervisor. And I knew I was pretty badly burned. Well, you could obviously just see the skin hanging off your arm. And I knew my stomach was burned, but nobody else could tell that because my clothes were completely fine. There's no sign really that they caught fire. And I'm still not sure why that is. Like, I was wearing my gloves and none of my hands got burned, and you could actually see the kind of the line from exactly where my gloves were, and I knew I had to get out of there, and I just figured like the sooner the better rather than waiting, and I got up and I just started walking out. It was probably a quarter mile or so, not real far up the hill. By this point I had some people come, some EMTs, and check me out, and I was like, nah, I'm just gonna keep walking, like I'm just gonna get out of here, like you guys can't do anything for me, I just need to go to a hospital. Somebody had driven the soup truck down a ways, and they just loaded me up in the back of the soup truck and drove me up to where the helicopter was gonna fly me to a burn center. So it all happened pretty quick. From when I got burned to actually when I got to the hospital was about an hour. So. This isn't the first time I've seen this, by no means. I've seen it happen quite a few times over my career. I mean, when it's vapor locked, your saw is not going to run right. So that's one of the things. If your saw starts running funky, or if it like dies when you're in the middle of cutting something hot, you're like, oh, I got a vapor lock. This time that it happened to me, it completely caught me off guard because it didn't match up to any of the signs that I recognized before. When it happened to me before, it'd always be in an obvious, like you're cutting something hot, like a hot burning juniper, and you just know your chainsaw's getting hot, or your chainsaw starts running a little funky, and you're like, oh, and you know my chainsaw's getting hot. You know, you could feel your chainsaw and it's hot, you know. But I wasn't cutting anything that was burning, and the chainsaw it was running fine, like no signs. Like I just shut it off like normal. One of the ways they say, oh, you're supposed to clear a vapor lock or whatever is you let your saw sit there for 15 minutes, and in my mind my saw just sitting there for that 15 minutes, I didn't think there was a chance of that really happening in my mind. If I had even the thought that my saw would have geysered, I obviously wouldn't have opened my cap where I did, but like I said, I had nothing to make me believe that it would happen. Yeah, and that's why I feel like now I couldn't really predict it. I mean, I was surprised once, I could probably be surprised again. The advice I'd give is, if you're in a situation where you feel like your fuel could catch you on fire by opening it, I just wouldn't do it. I mean, it's as simple as that. You got a flammable substance, you want to separate it from like a heat source. Because I mean, there's ways you could check your fuel level without ever opening your tank. You could literally hold your saw up and look. And sometimes it's kind of hard to see because the saws get dirty and whatnot, but you could definitely see if there's fuel in there or not. If I'm in the black and I'm gonna look through my tank to see at my gas level instead of opening the cap, And if I need to go open my cap, I'm gonna take it to a safe spot to do that. And I never thought I would just, get hurt by opening my fuel tank. It's just not one of those things that you recognize that much as being like a major hazard. And I still think it's kind of funny, that of all the years, that's kind of what put me in the hospital. Something as small and simple as that, I definitely don't feel like I can predict it anymore. So I just don't think it's worth betting on when your tank's gonna geyser or not, and just kind of treat it maybe like it's always could geyser, and just kind of put yourself in a better place whenever you're planning on opening the cap.
The purpose of the following simulation was to create a scenario with injuries and evaluate the effectiveness of the response of the wildland firefighters, aviation resources, IMT personnel, and to test the EMS coordination and readiness. Simulations that resemble operational practices and tempos permit personnel to develop and apply skills, teamwork, and critical decision-making in a controlled environment.
Fox trainee, Park Creek Campground, SAW team on command.
Park Creek, SAW team, Fox Cross trainee, command.
Yeah, Corey, I've had a buddy get hit over here. He's on the ground, man. A snag hit him hard. I need your guys' help.
Okay, I copy. We'll get some reinforcements that way. You are at Park Creek Campground.
That's correct, man. Hurry.
Sure, if you copy that on command. Sounds like we may have a medical emergency at Park Creek Campground. I'm going to be heading that way and getting some of my resources that are that way as well. I'll contact you when we arrive. Good afternoon from Park Creek. Sounds like we have an unconscious victim. At this time, I'd like to get ground transport ambulance coming this direction. And based on arrival on the scene, we'll get the 911 going for you.
I copy unconscious victim. You'd like ground transportation, confirming this is up the 582 road, Park Creek Campground. Is that correct?
Affirmative, 582 road, Park Creek Campground.
Medical unit copies. Break. Medic 7. Medic 7, med unit leader on command.
Go ahead, med unit leader.
So you're going to be responding to an unconscious male hit by a snag in the Park Creek Campground on Division Foxtrot up the 582 road.
Show medic 7 en route to Park Creek Campground on the 582 road, Division Foxtrot.
We have a medical over in the Park Creek, campground.
Pioneer Communications, Foxtrot trainee, LEO Command 3.
Foxtrot trainee, go ahead, med unit leader on LEO Command.
I've arrived in Park Creek Campground. Engine resources and medics have arrived too. We'll get back with you here shortly on an update.
Okay, nature of injury, individual was hit by a snag. Incident commander, at this time, I will take role of the IC, Foxtrot trainee, break.
Some initial information on the patient. Don't have an age. 30-year-old male, roughly. In stable condition, unconscious. The paramedic at this time is going to intubate. Break. This is urgent, red. We'd like to keep that ambulance headed this direction. Break.
The command frequency for this incident is going to be LEO 3.
There. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Thanks. Foxtrot trainee.
Medical unit leader on LE command. Medical unit leader, air attack.
Hey Mike, when able,
Yes, for air ops, we'd like you to...
Communications would like you to come up on the command frequency with some vitals.
If you are, air attack 196.
Snag, obvious head injury. Patient is backboarded. He is, we're assisting respirations. We've got an IV started. Last set of vitals, BP 144/110, pulse 114. respirations assisted at 12, GCS of 3. Pupils are reactive but unequal, and nose, ears, throat are clear, lungs equal.
Alright, copy. Medic 7 is blocked by a landslide on road 582. Break. Division Foxtrot, your ground ambulance will not be able to make it to you. Stand by. We will be looking for air extraction. We'll be contacting Hellbase.
Foxtrot training copies. Okay, I just got a call that the ambulance is blocked by a landslide, so we're going to be looking at medical evacuation via aircraft.
Okay.
As far as LZs around here, they're pretty limited, so we do have that short haul aircraft down at Hellbase. We need to look at a spot. So if you got him stabilized enough to the point where we can go around and look at something that might be viable, we can take a little walk around and look.
Just support, we'll continue to do IVs,
Are you gonna find a spot?
vitals, and apparently the ambulance isn't going to be here, so we're going to do a short haul.
Okay.
So let's just support him here till we decide where we're going to go.
Okay.
Unit later, air tech.
We have had a change in plans. Ground transportation has been blocked by a landslide on the 582 road. We are going to need aerial extraction. We're going to need 00 Bravo to come up on it. If you can handle that for possible air extraction from Division Foxtrot.
Second copy. 00 Bravo for air extraction. That's going to be short haul for Division Foxtrot.
That's affirmative. And also we're going to have a medevac ship coming in from St. Al's out of Boise. We're going to have them come up on 155280, direct them as you see fit.
So, this is a pretty good opening here as far as, the size. If you could walk around and look at some of the other campsites and maybe see if you can identify something else like this, just kind of spread that out. And if you got another body that can look at that as well, that'd be great. And out at this time, we're just trying to identify a good spot where we can short haul from close to this area. I kind of got one spot in the campground I'm looking at. I got some other resources out looking for some other decent sized openings. Other than that, if you could take a look around.
Yeah, will do. And if you have coordinates of anything you're looking at, I can relay as well. We'll keep our eyes open. I'll get back with you.
And short hauler, Sierra Bravo, how's it going?
Good, thanks.
Yeah. Foxtrot trainee, 00 Bravo, TAC 11.
00 Bravo, Foxtrot trainee, go.
Ready, lift.
Slides right in, and then we'll try to slide these handles on the backboard.
Realistic training can prepare personnel to respond to unforeseen events. It prepares them to act appropriately when an unpredicted situation arises. Full-scale simulations involve some degree of risk. However, the reward is increased value of lessons learned from this type of training. Experience is the best way to develop the skills that are essential for effective decision-making. Consider incorporating the following actions when preparing and conducting a simulation. Establish a simulation coordinator who's responsible for oversight of the simulation. Depending on complexity, the coordinator may employ observer controllers to monitor the scenario. Conduct briefings with leadership, cooperators, and personnel involved. Create the scenario. Consider training opportunities for personnel involved with the scenario. Implement hazard controls. Conduct AARs and evaluate the exercise. As always, firefighter and public safety should be the highest priority of any scenario planning process.
Useful weather information depends upon the generation of accurate forecasts and their timely distribution. It is then the responsibility of the person on the ground to take the time to listen to and have the knowledge and skills to comprehend the information. This information, along with personal observations and local knowledge, can then be applied. So how do you interpret the information in a fire weather forecast? How is it different when you read it versus listening to it over the radio? And how do you give it or receive it in a briefing? Rick Ochoa works for Predicted Services at the National Interagency Fire Center. He has written many fire weather forecasts. We hope he can help you interpret the content of the forecasts you see, hear, and deliver every day.
The main components of a fire weather forecast are first the headlines. The headlines could be a red flag warning, a fire weather watch, something real critical for the firefighters. And if I can explain what a red flag warning is, a red flag warning is a combination of critical fire weather such as winds, dry lightning, in combination with dry fuels. These warnings and watches are provided for firefighter safety. A warning, a red flag warning, means those conditions are either occurring or imminent. A fire weather watch means that those conditions may occur in the near future, in the next 12 to 48 hours. The good warning or good watch has both a geographic location, such as the Boise National Forest, in addition to the particular fire weather zone number. The weather discussion will talk about the synoptic features such as cold fronts, high pressure ridges, low pressure troughs, and so on, that's producing the weather. A lot of times these forecasts are very detailed and very long, and it's important for the listener to try and pull out what are the important things, like cold fronts are very important, any kind of wind shifts, thunderstorms, turning hotter, turning drier, and things like that. So you should really be listening for those weather features that are really going to affect the conditions on your fire. The first element in a fire weather forecast is the sky weather, and that'll be the sky condition, whether it's cloudy or clear or partly cloudy, and the weather element like thunderstorms, rain, showers, fog, things like that. So pay particular attention to those things that are critical, such as thunderstorms. The next element is temperature, and they'll give you a range of temperatures for your particular fire weather area, and they'll oftentimes give you a trend, whether it's going to be 5 degrees warmer, 5 degrees cooler, and so on. The next one is humidity. They'll give you, again, a range of humidity values along with a trend. And after that is the wind. With the winds, you'll get a variety. You'll get slope valley winds, ridge top winds, 20-foot winds, and 20-foot winds are those winds 20 feet above the affected vegetation. So if you're dealing with an area with just grass, that's going to be 20 feet. If you're dealing in timber, it's 20 feet above the average tops of those trees there. Obviously, if you're on a ridge top, you want to listen for those winds. If you're down in the valley, pay particular attention to those slope and valley winds. The Haynes Index is an index that combines stability and moisture, and the values range from 2 to 6. 6 being high. And so this index does not include things like wind or other factors like that. It's strictly a moisture and stability of that atmosphere close to the ground. So again, what I'd be listening for there is if there's a Haines of 5 or 6, moderate or high, those are the times I'd be really concerned about. If it's a 2, 3, or 4, typically those are the lower ranges, and typically there's not going to be an issue with stability or moisture. LAL's lightning activity level talk about the number of lightning strikes you're going to have over a given area. They range from 1, which is no thunderstorms, to a 6, which is numerous thunderstorms, typically dry. So again, I'd be listening for, you know, values like 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are the ones that are going to contain more thunderstorms. In addition to the thunderstorms, listen very closely as to whether they're going to be wet thunderstorms, dry thunderstorms, or a mixture. The mixing height basically tells the firefighter that lower atmosphere, what is the depth of that atmosphere that's going to be well mixed? Typically in the afternoons it'll be quite high. It could be several thousand feet, and at night typically those mixing levels come down quite a bit. They might just be a few hundred feet. That's important because the higher the mixing height, the greater the instability, and so with that you're going to probably see more fire activity, fire behavior with the greater mixing heights. Transport winds are important because you want to know where that smoke's going to be going. So that'll the averaged winds within that mixed layer as to whether they're going to be coming out of the south or north, and they'll give you a wind speed there. So if you have high mixing heights and high transport winds, you're going to have pretty good smoke dispersion. Low mixing height and low winds are typically going to be smoke problems. The extended forecast, there what I'd be looking for is anything out of the ordinary. Are there going to be thunderstorms? Are there going to be strong winds? Get an idea about whether it's going to be turning warmer or drier. So a lot of times the most interesting, the most significant weather is going to be occurring in the extended period. So pay close attention to that.
Fire weather forecasts are full of useful information and are readily available throughout the fire season. The next exercise is intended to provide an opportunity to translate a fire weather forecast into the form of a briefing. Your facilitator will now set up the exercise.
It's been 20 years since the tragedy at Storm King Mountain in western Colorado. 14 firefighters were entrapped by fire and killed. Since those events in 1994, a lot of research, analysis, and training have gone into the issue of entrapments and burnovers. It's fair to say lives have been saved, but it's also true that lives continue to be lost when firefighters are trapped by wildfire. Experts at the National Interagency Fire Center looked into the statistics and records related to wildland fire fatalities. We have discovered a few insights that we think will stand as solid reminders as you head out to the fire line this year. Fatalities, entrapments, and serious accidents are tracked by the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. Commonly called safetygrams, these statistics have been tracked annually back to 1987. Unless otherwise noted, the following information came directly from these safetygrams. This refresher module delves deeper into the statistics and fatalities resulting exclusively from burnovers and entrapments, as opposed to those resulting from motor vehicle accidents, aviation, medical, and other fatality categories. For brevity purposes, we will reference all direct fire contact and exposure fatalities as burnovers. Burnovers and entrapments are not the leading cause of line-of-duty deaths of wildland firefighters. In fact, they're not even in the top 3. Of the 448 line-of-duty deaths, 88, or 20%, were a result of burnovers. Categorically, vehicle accidents, aviation accidents, and medical incidents each account for more fatalities than burnovers. As you can see, burnovers are the 4th cause, followed by hazard trees and other. Due to the loss of 19 firefighters on the Yarnell Hill incident in 2013, Arizona has recorded the most burnovers since 1987. Colorado has the 2nd highest amount at 14, all of which were the result of the Storm King Mountain incident in 1994. California is the next with 13, then Idaho, Washington, and Kentucky with 4 each. Utah is the next with 3. The other highlighted states have had 1 or 2. The numbers shown here, dating back to 1910, have been derived from historical fire reports, official agency documentation, and safetygrams. Due to changes in definitions over time and how data is gathered, there are likely gaps in some variations in numbers. However, this information is still informative. Of the states shown in blue, we have found 0 burnover fatality records. Of the following groups, which has had the most burnovers since 1987? Federal, state, city, county, contractor, or volunteers? Are you surprised by these results? There may be plenty of reasons for these numbers, but in all reality, a contractor with the lowest statistics isn't any safer than a federal employee on the fire line. We compiled data from as many burnover fatality fires as possible, going back to 1930s, and focused on 2 specific pieces of information: time of blow-up and time of burnover. 16 burnover fatality fires blew up between 1400 and 1630. On 15 of those fires, the burnovers occurred during the same time frame. The average time span from blow-up to burnover after removing anomalies was 24 minutes. What do all these numbers mean? Looking back, we already know what these mean. Looking forward, what should these numbers mean?
So that is it for the refresher course for the Salem Fire Department Wildland Refresher for 2020. There are a couple more things which need to be accomplished. There are 2 forms that need to be filled out and returned back to us so that we can have the information recorded. The first thing is the self-assessment health questionnaire and also the State of Utah RT-130 form with the completion dates for each one of the individual modules, which we just covered in the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or Chief Ely, and we will get those questions answered for you. Other than that, we are all done for the refresher for the year 2020 for the Wildland red card process. And we do need to have those in by the end of May, so this will take place for both meetings of May, and make sure everything is done and we get those forms sent in and submitted to us as soon as possible. Thank you.